Let's go. Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Jenny Myers. I'm a senior designer here at RCH Studios. I also have a side business called Myers Collective. I do product design as well. So I was very interested in bringing in some Los Angeles product designers to talk about their work and to talk about how their work might influence what we do as spatial designers as well. Today, we are talking with 5 designers, 4 different companies. Brennan Ravenhill founded his LA studio in 2010, which took off quickly after he was noticed for his memorable design for the interior of the restaurant Osteria La Buca. He has built boats and barns. His father was chief curator of the National Museum of African Art at the Smithsonian. And his work has been celebrated for a timeless but modern elegance. Jolene is a prolific and busy LA designer and entrepreneur. She and her husband, Ben, started Park Studio in 2014, which began as a side hustle at their dining table and has since earned them Interior Design Magazine's Best of Year award. Eric Trine of Amigo Modern and Eric Trine Studio, a self-described object-based designer and commercial artist. Eric Trine grew up with an obsession with power tools and building things. He kicked off his Long Beach studio around 2013. He defines his take on modernism as clean, simple, casual, and approachable, and always with a colorful LA twist. Grant Fenning and Glenn Lawson of Lawson Fenning. So Lawson Fenning began nearly 20 years ago as a partnership between 2 students at Art Center College of Design. And Glenn and Grant, designers with a passion and vision for furniture, started with a small but ambitious workshop in Pasadena called Room 107. That has since evolved into a wildly successful and coveted national brand. Inspired by vintage and California modern, Lawson Fenning not only fabricates and markets their own prolific designs, they also have been key designers on many residential and hospitality projects. They continue to curate select vintage and new pieces, and they nurture a robust platform that provides a rare place for up-and-coming designers and artists to showcase their work. So, first question. You have all said in one way or another that you're inspired by California modernism. What is it about California and Los Angeles specifically that feeds your creativity and informs the direction of your work?
For me, it's the history of craft that exists here in California, but specifically in Southern California. We have such an amazing wealth of history. Like, we went to school in Pasadena, and I had no idea when I got here from New York that, Pasadena was sort of a epicenter for mid-century design, all the architecture, all the furniture design, the product design, the landscape design. It was like an endless playground for us to really discover. And it influenced me heavily early on in terms of my point of view, my cues, sort of what I think about when I'm designing. And it's really, a lot has to do with the craft that's inherent here and the history of craft that we are so lucky to be a part of.
Hello, I would concur with most of that. I arrived in California in the early 90s and didn't know much about, the history of California and the fact that it was really where America looked toward to mid-century design and the product design and the progressive architecture that happened in Los Angeles at that time was super influential to me and developing product, and also just the environment and I came from the deep south, and the idea of indoor outdoor living and having spaces that you would occupy like that, and that was fascinating for me and definitely influenced my design.
Yeah, I think how much more recently here. I've only been here since 2010, but I think when I came out here, I didn't realize that LA was the largest manufacturing center in the whole country, like the largest manufacturing city in the whole Southern California region. And that was just kind of this big awakening of just like the resources at my disposal in terms of like what it is to be a maker, in terms of the best vendors, the vendors who are, really daily, practicing their craft at a very, very high level and who are very competitive in their industries. Like, really attracted me. Almost like I always say like a chef in Napa. Just like the terroir, like the ingredients were so ripe to be like, oh, if I use this and this process, I can combine them to do this, and just having that at my disposal, and then that being overlaid with what Grant and Glenn were talking about, this history of Southern California modernism, but as a modern person myself, to be in a city that's so relatively young, I think there's this thing. I came from the East Coast more growing up, and they're 200-300 years old is like the average, or 100 years old, and to have a city that my house is built in 1938 is considered old for like my neighborhood in some ways, and it's still very modern. Just how recently some of those elements have come about here, and how this was just like this really crucible of thinking and thought, and so much experimentation that happened here, and to be like immersed in that, which just felt so fresh and different than it had been in the East Coast, and people were so much more open and connected than they were back east. And I remember just early on, I met Grant and Glenn, and just the openness and community that comes about from being in Southern California is, I think, somewhat related to the weather. So I think there's an element of just like the sunniness and the optimism that comes from perhaps Hollywood, but I think it really influences the connections and the work that in those relations I have with vendors a lot.
So now I'm realizing that I'm the only one who was born and raised in Southern California. And no, we talked earlier, so I know she wasn't. And because you don't move from California to go to Iowa State, yeah. So I mean, maybe you do if you play football or something. But so for me, I grew up in a suburban tract neighborhood in Orange County, but it was all built in the '60s. And in my neighborhood, they picked 6 styles of homes. So the developer, 2,300 homes in this zone, and there were 6 styles, and I grew up in the Plymouth style that I found out, and then there's like a more Dutch style, and there's a cottagey one, but every 15th house there was a flat roof, just kind of clean cut modern house. And growing up, even as a 10-year-old, rollerblading around my parents' neighborhood, I was like, those are the coolest houses. And my mom and dad, who are like from the Church of Costco, like everything I ever grew up with is Kirkland signature. I mean, like no kind of cultural or artistic savvy, or whatsoever. And they're like, why do you like those ugly houses? And as a kid, I already like had some aesthetic longing or desire, or I just liked the way certain architecture was speaking to me. In Naples, Long Beach, which is close to where I grew up, there's a house by an architect named Edward Killingsworth, who it was a case study house, I think 22 or 25, and it's a box with a 17-foot door. And that was his signature thing, that he would do these massive doors. And paddling around in the canals growing up, or going around on boats with my parents, I would say, that house is the best house in the neighborhood. And they're like, no, what about like the Italian villa, the thing that happened in the 90s? And so somehow I've always been drawn aesthetically to what was playing out in the kind of California modern movement, whether it's ranch style or high modern stuff that happened in the 50s and 60s and early 70s before it got into bad modern. But that's always been something there, innate, that keeps, I guess, maybe drawing me back to what I was into as a child even.
I have, so I'm from a farm in Iowa, and nowhere cool by any means in comparison to these gentlemen, but I grew up drawing on my notebooks, telling my parents that I was going to be moving to California, and I'm pretty sure they would rip them up and throw them away because they did not want me to move. But yeah, I came out here probably 13 years ago, drawn to how everything is indoor, outdoor. Obviously, growing up in the Midwest, you have snow. It's hard to get around. I wanted to be able to enjoy life 365. And specifically when it comes to the design and the simplicity of what this state in Southern California has to offer, we just approach our product design as simple, straightforward, and user-friendly. So it's not fussy. It serves a purpose. You can tell that it's a light. You can understand that it's a knob or hardware. So it's nothing profound by any means, but we're definitely drawn to also the natural elements that we have here in Southern California, and making sure that all of our metal is not plated and it's raw and natural and those kinds of things. So I think that's how we approach sort of that modern conversation for our business.
I guess we all talk and think about modernism as more of a conceptual premise and how we address design. What is the modernism of today?
When you think about California, I think like the studio craft movement of California and Sam Malouf and kind of these small, almost like garage or shed or barn kind of stuff that came out in the 50s and 60s. And I think for the small studios that are operating specific in this town, we're in like a hybrid zone, making use of the kind of manufacturing capability. I mean, I know Brendan has and Jolene, myself as well. We still run a 2-person studio because we, and you heard it here first, we are outsourcerers. We are wizards of outsourcing in this town, because we can just drive around in our cars and meet new people who do this thing, and we can run a very small, tight ship, kind of coming in as designers and orchestrating all these different vendors to get the thing that we want to do, bring it to market at the price that we want to offer it. So I think for us, it's like a hybrid craft manufacturing. It's like California craft mixed with Bauhaus kind of space that we're in right now.
I think what California modernism does is it sets a really high bar for like story and narrative and craft in a way that like I feel like, at least for the size of our studios, like I have a lot of peers who just, they make everything in China, and I'm like, well, that's just not our process. Like our process is like, we could do that, we could make better margins, we could lower the price for everybody, but then like we would worry about the environment being polluted because it's used in some factory. But rather, I can go down there, I can see how it's being made, I can get the sense of it, and then design can respond to the materiality in some way that it wouldn't if it was like this like separated process. So there is an element of modernism, I think, that's dictated by the proud history of the craft movement here, making stuff that sets an incredibly high bar about having pride that your object is referencing the materials and the manufacturing methods that make it. And to kind of only to do that, you kind of have to see it happen. You can't do it in a computer and just send it to print. And I think you can do that and be modern. I'm not saying you can't. I think for me at least in California, it's so much about the narrative aspect of it. And I think the past is, if anything, like guiding light for how to continue those conversations forward, and if everything, like if the Eames and Schindlers and Notaries of the world like taught us anything, is that you can do amazing things with like very simple materials if you just engage them in conversation. And you can't do that if you do that remotely. And I think the thing about California is like it's so physical and tangible. It's like we have the best makers, and so I think we have some of the better designs.
Well, as two young guys who moved here to attend school, yeah, how did that play out in a different way?
I think for me, speaking to the limitations, for me, I look at it sort of the opposite. Like I've got all of these cues that are like free and easy to use, and a narrative that I can stick with, which for me is very comforting to like, I have a lane, I have a point of view, and I'm comforted by my surroundings that sort of reinforce that view. We're not interested in making things anywhere else, like, China, like we can all talk about that, but so it makes it easy. Like I can just source here. I don't have to like worry about sourcing anywhere else. I don't have to worry about designing for, some unknown. Like it's all sort of inherent in our environment, which we're super lucky. I see our peers that live in New York, and they're like, how do you get stuff made? Like, how do you drive around and like, get a chair made in a day? And it's like, it's possible. Like we can sample, we can prototype it very quickly, very, efficiently, and it's fun. It's a fun process for us. So yeah, I feel lucky rather than limited for sure.
So as you guys can see from the environment we're in the shop, RCH Studios, Rios is really built on a culture of making. Historically, it's a 30-plus-year-old practice, and they've concentrated on prototyping, trial and error, a culture of curiosity. Can you guys talk about this idea of making and how you keep it present in your process? Are we in a kind of treasured place and moment?
I don't want to underestimate the role of like Hollywood, I guess, in my life, even though like it's a different side of town, and I don't think we use a lot of that stuff. But I think the whole idea, I get inspired by just like the creativity of just that whole. I mean, this is like this largest manufacturing center, but it's also like the largest like movie hit making music. Like, I mean, all the arts that surround that stuff, I think, really permeate Los Angeles in a way that I know I feel like I have vendors who are at the top of the industry because of, like, aerospace, but also the top of the industry because of Hollywood, because they have to be able to turn around a piece of plastic for a movie shoot, in 2 days, because otherwise it's not going to look right on a, and the budgets are endless. So there's like a slight, maybe not subsidy from the industry, but it definitely helps open up the possibility of making in a different way, just because the realms of between aerospace on one end and Hollywood on the other end, it kind of gets a lot of craft in between that stuff. It's very unique about LA.
I think we've found that when we go to the aerospace types of companies, that they find us to be too small to work with. And the sort of downside to that is they're like, who are you and how many units would you need in 2 weeks? And we found it to be easier to work with the sort of smaller companies just like us. So the mom and pop shops, the ones who have families that we can help support, which is sort of where we've gone in terms of partnering with certain companies. It's interesting because I feel like when I go to certain events and I talk to other industrial designers about where they're making their product, it's like, yeah, that guy never got back to us, and we even stopped in. And so for us, what we found is sort of that sweet spot is, again, another smaller company just like ourselves who understand that we might need to call them at, Saturday night at 9 o'clock, and they're going to take our phone call because they want to produce lovely things with us. So the nice thing is you have sort of that range here in Los Angeles, and I do find that a lot of those smaller companies aren't going to have a website, and they're, we started in our Google searches and found a lot of the more aerospace businesses to help us, and then we ended up sort of by word of mouth getting into those smaller niches, which is awesome. But also, we're kind of like once they die out, like how does that work? All of our vendors are very small family-owned businesses.
We've been struggling. We've been trying to make new stuff. Like, we have new ideas. We want to get new stuff made, and just approaching new factories with different capabilities than our other manufacturers. They're just, it seems like they don't even want the business. And my dad runs a company, and they do manufacture overseas. And he says, Eric, just come over. They're eager. They will build anything you want. Like, they will start a new wing of a factory to just start building chairs for you. And we've talked to people, and they're just like, oh, we don't want your business, and like whatever. I'm like, okay, but this chair that we designed, we've sold thousands of. So there's a possibility that if you we could do that with you. We don't know, but like, could you go through the process of prototyping, developing, and it's just those not getting back to us, and all these things showing up in person, and they're just like, oh, it's just too small a business. Or and then we've found other industries. We've been doing some exciting stuff with new HDPE. It's a recyclable plastic, and it's like super durable outdoor, and they use it for like kids' playground equipment. So we're like, oh, this is a really cool material. It's like great for outdoors. So we've been doing a lot of experimentation with that. But even prototyping, they're hitting us with these like small order fees. They're like, it's not like a full pallet. Like, that's an extra $100. And we're like, the material itself is $150. So that just it's like all of these compounding effects of running a really small business. So, because we're, when you think about mass production, there are certain things that for us are mass. Like, we make 2,000 of this thing a year, but that's nowhere near mass production. So while you can make everything here, there's so many different toggles as far as price point. And our stuff is, compared to these guys, we're the affordable one in the group. Our stuff is ridiculously simple, and we try to make it as inexpensive as possible. And that's just that's our vision as a company. And so we're in a different zone. Our margins are, maybe tighter or whatever. Like, I'm embarrassed that I have a $1,500 chair, where these guys can't sell a chair that's only $1,500. Maybe, it's like there's I'm being generalist, but there's all of these little market pockets, and so operating in that zone has been a challenge for us. And with these new chairs, which you can see next week at the Los Angeles Design Festival. I was like, I want these outdoor lounge chairs to retail for $500, and just our costs on it. I was like, no, we're looking at $900, unless we produce 1,000 at a time or something. So, playing with all of that, to make something that's ridiculously simple is still really hard to do without the aid of full mass production.
Can you all speak to your process? How do you work with your team, your clients, your collaborators?
The create process is, I think, really just based on having we get a lot of inspiration from manufacturing visits and like new material processes. So I think oftentimes when we start a product, we'll have a brief conceptual idea of like what perhaps product category or even typology we're looking at, be it a chandelier or a sconce, or we do a lot of lighting these days. So we just spent a long time working on a new beam pendant that we debuted in New York and we'll be showing at the Los Angeles Design Festival next week with Eric Trine at the Row downtown LA. But our beam pendant is a new linear fixture, and so we really want to revisit that classic typology of the linear shop lamps that, or linear lamps in general that you see. And we started just thinking about what it meant to be a linear fixture by just investigating material and processes that are inherently linear, and just really starting to kind of geek out on the things that by their very nature were could be made in endlessly lengths and had a line as part of their kind of manufacturing methods. Like oftentimes in our process, like light is this other material that really inspires us, and so much of the success or failure of a lamp to us is really the output and the quality of the light that it casts. Because at Eric's point, we can't really often compete on like lumens per dollar. Like we're just not set up to like compete with these high bay lights here. Like we're not making stuff in China. We're not gonna have the quantity and the scale, and so we really need to tell like a much more narrative exploration, but also really think about how the quality of light can be kind of obsessed over, and then that is the aspect of the narrative that you sell or try to show. And so in this lamp, most of our light is actually not pointed down or up; it's pointed out towards the side, which in the acrylic version it really creates this, this reflector illuminates to create this double refraction, which ends up casting a very more diffuse and like nice quality of light. And the whole idea was we're using LEDs, which were a lot of the driving off point of even visiting this typology is the natural efficient LEDs kind of beg for kind of a linear fixture, just the way they're naturally arrayed, but trying to do something that like sacrifices a little bit of the natural efficiency of the light because it's so efficient now, like 140 lumens per watt, to try to increase actually the quality of the light. So this thing probably only puts out like 80 or 90 lumens per watt, which is still like 8 or 9 times more efficient than like a incandescent bulb, but the light quality is so much better because most of the light is actually doubly refracted before it hits your eyes, which ends up really softening the glow of the light and reducing the flicker rate and making it just the whole thing seem like sunset. I don't know how else to describe it. Like it feels like a flattering light. And it's just like this thing where it's like we had to just try to think about how the materials influence us, but I think almost to this idea is like you also got to find the segment in the market that you're trying to compete against, right? Because if you're not selling something that's, and this is hard because our lamps I think are sometimes I think they're boring. I say that for myself, like so simple that like it's an editing process. There's a lot of that also in my design process. I feel like it's the longer I'm at it, the more I take away, and that's always benefits it. I think if I'd shown you guys drawings of this like a year ago, it would have looked like something from like a Star Wars with like lots of extra like appendages and like things sticking out, and that's the first scale prototypes I built were like that. But as you edit and discover the materiality, I think you're in this constant editing process. But what you try to hold on to, for me at least, is like the reason for being. And I think that's just like the guilt of a maker sometimes. Is like you bring something new into the world, it costs obviously lots and lots of things, like takes resources, takes environments, takes all that stuff, and like always try to stay at the core of like, does this exist? And if it doesn't, like what am I trying to say that's new? And I think that's like what drives the constant narrative, because I feel like I oftentimes lose faith in the product design process. It's just a long process, and if I don't have that kind of North Star of like what's guiding me, I don't get over the finish line. So I realize that it's a very long process for me as a result.
So our design process, I would say, is it's almost like giving our own studio a design brief, right? So what is it that we're missing? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We are doing really well with our hardware, but we'll never retire from our hardware because the margins are so small. Even though everyone's like, where are they so expensive? I'm like, try to get something made in LA and like get back to me. So for us, more recently, the sconce and the pendant that I gave you for photos, I mean, essentially our design brief was, how do you hide those ugly LED light bulbs? Like, what is happening and why are they so nasty? So let's think about how to hide those without using glass. Because for whatever reason, my husband and I both have this fear of globes like coming crashing down on us in an earthquake. So we decided to go with acrylic on this design. And we specifically wanted to make a globe that wasn't glass, but also had a collar that you could easily, even though the bulb itself is going to last for many years, if for whatever reason it needed to be changed, we wanted people to easily change it. And again, going back to that user-friendly conversation, we wanted people to understand how to easily change that. And that's simply by adding threads and unscrewing something, changing your bulb, and then rescrewing the globe back on. So part of that process, after we realized what it was that we were missing, what we wanted to achieve, starts with a sketch always. I always recommend sketching and dating your sketches. We do prototyping, honestly, out of cardboard scraps in our studio. And then we take it to our machinist. So he actually came from the aerospace world, and he started his own shop, and we're lucky enough to find him locally. And he's always a no, and we always have to push him to be a yes. So once we kind of get to that point where we can agree on how this thing is going to be made, what's the cost, his brother-in-law actually is a machinist as well, who is next door to him, so we have access to both of them. So yeah, and then we prototype, and we're also lucky enough to be able to put them in our home and live with them for a while and see if the scale is right, and put them on social to see what people say, and just get so many DMs / not at all. I'm like 2 from my mom. And then we bring it to market. So my husband is a photographer as well. That was part of his education. So we photograph all our own products. We have our own studio in our backyard, which sounds crazy, but I feel like I should have sent you guys that photo. And then we put it on our website and we bring it to market. So it's kind of, sometimes it's a quick process. Sometimes it takes longer than we would like. But I would say sort of that bottleneck can happen with our vendors. Because again, I think that when they see us bringing a new market or a new item to them, they think, these guys are already putting me at 7 days a week. Like, I don't know if I can do more time. So we like to push and make it happen.
So as you guys have heard, we've been doing this for a while. So I think the way I would think of our process now is usually looking at our collection, which is, I think it's over 200 pieces. And so a lot of times we'll expand upon things we've already done, which it doesn't sound as creative, but we definitely get inspiration from within a little bit, and we'll have an outdoor line that maybe needs expanding. And some of the pictures that you had were we just released a dining chair that was inspired by the collection we'd already started, which had a daybed and a dining table and a lounge chair. And then the dining chairs, that's the lounge chair. The dining chair is there on the right. And so that we just looked at some of the geometry that we already were using, and also the materials, and kind of created from there. I mean, there's still stuff that drops from the sky sometimes, and inspiration that definitely comes from, for me, a lot of times it comes from a landscape and travel and environment, and just honestly just being outside in nature. Things will just fall from the sky. And
part of what's sort of our special sauce is that we're really collaborative. So we've got each other, which is nice, to just bounce stuff off of, I'll sketch something, Grant will sketch something, we come together and kind of hash it out. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of, strong feelings, but ultimately, we come up with something pretty great, and it feels really collaborative. So that's a big part of our process, I think, is just being able to bounce stuff off each other. And another big part is because we retail ourselves, we get instant feedback. So we can put something on the floor, and it's like everyone just walks past it for a month, and we're like, okay, that didn't go well. Or everyone's like, this is amazing, and all of a sudden we're selling prototypes of things that we haven't fully fleshed out. We're like, okay, this has got promise. So I think we're able to very quickly gauge what's working and what's not through a retail customer, which is sort of an unusual way of testing. We're making it and selling it in the same place, which is kind of cool.
We have 2 approaches to how we develop new stuff. This is the lobby of the Saguaro Hotel in Palm Springs. And so we have 2 ways of developing. One is we will get a specific client request. So the creative director at the Saguaro we put out a lot of colorful stuff. So like, hey, let's hit these guys up. They could probably deliver something colorful for us. And so we went through this process. Miles, who works with me and has worked with me for almost 5 years, he's my sole and only employee. The only reason I don't have to hire another employee is because he has an actual industrial design degree and knows how to draw everything perfectly on the computer. So when we have a client request, we can actually draw, he drew these perfectly, so much so that on Instagram, he posts before and after of a rendering to the actual install, and it is picture perfect. So when we came at this process for this client, we developed these pieces specifically for that space and place. This project was all these little colored zones. So you've got the yellow zone, the blue zone, there's a green zone, there's a pink zone. But really, we're riffing on Palm Springs kind of modern aesthetic, indoor, outdoor, really simple moves. This is where we got into playing with that 1-inch tubing and trying to find all these new vendors to do this stuff. So that's one way, is that we need to have a specific client request and a specific space, and we then go to task on that. The other way is my personal like playtime. So we need to have a specific reason or no reason at all. So there's usually nothing in between. So we need to have, so with this, this is a chair I developed during grad school when I gave myself a task of making a chair in 2 hours. I'd never made a chair before, and I was like, I'm gonna make a chair. I'm gonna make it in 2 hours. I actually said 1 hour, but I couldn't make it that fast. So I was like, I'm gonna make a chair in 2 hours. It's a 2-hour chair project. And then I did that for 5 days in a row. So at the end of the week, I had 5 chairs. This was chair number 2 on day number 2. And from that, someone said, hey, I really like that. Can you make me another one? I said, sure. Just like I'll charge you for materials and beer and we'll go again. And I did that while I was in grad school. The entire rest of my 2 years is that I did this kind of patron prototyping where I would make something, share it on Instagram. Someone, that's cool. What do you charge for it? I was like, I don't know. Materials and beer. And would continue to make it, and to the point where this chair mainly became my thesis project. In the same way, these little plants based on these octahedron shapes, again, I was just welding triangles together and putting them together. Like, I have kids now, and I see what they do with like popsicle sticks, and I'm like, oh, that's what I do professionally. Like, that's what I was doing, is that's all I did. And I thought I invented a shape. I thought I invented this thing, and I was like, oh, there's all these triangles. And then I started doing research, and I was like, oh, no, it's a platonic solid. It's called an octahedron. It's been around since the history of math. Like, you know, and then I find out, like, oh, Noguchi used them. And, you know, then I feel less and less and less like a genius. But took that shape and then applied kind of function to it. So I said, okay, what can I do with that? We can put a standard terracotta pot. We bumped it up. We turned it into a side table, coffee table. So I have all this time where I just like make stuff, and then I go, okay, now how can we bring this into being and call it a thing that people know, like tables, plant stands, chairs. So those are the 2 ways that we kind of develop. And then on the next one, these ones were similar pieces, just playing with leftover rings and discs from other products and putting them together in interesting ways. And this piece kind of flips over and reverses, and it can be like a little pedestal or plant stand. And so that's how the main way that we develop kind of as a team is from very different kind of places. And mine is more tactile and material, because I can't draw. And I definitely can't draw on the computer. You know, so it's these, and that creates an interesting dialogue for us on our team too, is that push and pull.
I think that's really interesting, like how we each approach things differently and allow the process to evolve. I read some pieces on your process before you guys came, just to do a quick bio, and you know, I can picture each of you kind of in your environment just from what I've read, but I remember reading that you kind of pick up a couple pieces of metal from the shop and start welding, and you're almost drawing and welding So I think that it's important for us to remember, like, the process doesn't have to be so precious, that we can really approach things in a raw way and kind of pick up these fundamental elements and see where it evolves. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So here at the office, we do residential, commercial, and hospitality. We also do landscape and a whole graphics, a whole host of things. But specific to residential versus commercial, or hospitality versus commercial, we're of course seeing this like significant blurring of the line between, you know, home life and work life. There's no division anymore. We're constantly on our phones. I think it certainly has an impact on our design. So I'm just wondering, with this loosening of the boundary between, is there any impact or influence to the way you approach your design?
Not personally the way I design, but I definitely feel what you're saying, and you can see it in common, like, you know, shared spaces, even restaurants, hotels, the new like kind of shared work environments that are created that feel like homes. And I feel like that you know, if you go back and look at 80s, 90s hotel lobbies versus what you see now, I mean, we do sell and spec a lot for contract, but our stuff is all residential. So I think it's just, you know, for us, the way that it's gone into a more comfy, cozy thing, it's kind of how we want to design anyway. We're trying to design things that people are comfortable in, and, you know, they have that sense of, you know, coziness.
I think for our most recent product, the beam pendant, we specifically were trying to find a fixture that could equally be at home in like a boardroom as well as a dining table as well as a bar. And I think it's just, maybe it's just like playing it safe to try to get all three, but I think it's more just that all three are blending into each other, I think, to that point. And it's not because we would be competing with like you know, very efficient lighting, but it's just because the atmosphere and the desires are now to kind of create this more welcoming place in all three of those places. And I think it has opened up our market. One of our big clients is a co-working space, I think, that uses residential kind of lighting theories in their office spaces because they find that it's successful and that it's actually where people want to spend their time. And so I think the tricky thing about that stuff is the price points are so sensitive, and I think that ends up being a lot of the challenge. I think that there's an attraction to wanting that stuff, but you often find yourself really like super fighting the budget on it, and I think that's actually becomes this other challenge. I think Eric's also, but just like to do some of these jobs, you really have to use budget as like one of the biggest constraints almost of like how you approach the whole thing. And so when we're designing something, we have a constant like cost of goods sold spreadsheet that we're constantly getting estimates and being like, is this viable? You know, we're trying to hit this threshold of like where we're trying to keep it below, because if it doesn't, it just really limits the market. And so that takes a certain sense of research and understanding the market. But it is shifting, I would say. People are a little bit more comfortable spending stuff on that, and a little bit more comfortable with quality also. That's a big part of it, that you have to have certain standards when you go. I think the contract, like the amount of like indemnity forms and insurance back things you have to have is another cost of doing business. You can't be like, all right, I'm not going to sign that thing guaranteeing this for 3 years, but you also have to design that it can last for 3 years, which, you know, and care instructions and all that stuff. So it definitely affects our design process, and just puts a higher bar. And all this stuff has to be UL listed, for example. I'm not sure you deal with UL listed, but it's just like you can't get in any contract job without that stuff, which is good. It's always made us better lighting designers. But in the beginning, I remember I sold some things to Grant and Glenn in the beginning that was definitely not UL listed and would never be UL listed, and it was like all about the art and the idea of this like glass socket, but like, and I wanted to keep it, but eventually it was like, this is like contrarian to our whole design of like saying no to people all the time because we can't do what they want. So it's better to just like cut your losses if you aren't adapt to the marketplace. So the constraints of industry are real, and they definitely do affect my specific, at least, design process.
I would say that I'm lucky enough to have my rep group parallel, so I get to see all types of designs because of that. And then I see a lot of fun renderings that come out of design firms, and then it takes me back to the Park Studio drawing board of, okay, so the sconce would be great in a corridor, but would it also be great in a hallway in a residence? Could we also flip it and make it horizontal and have it be over a vanity? You know, it's asymmetrical now, which means we would need to make it symmetrical so it doesn't sag. I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of conversations that happen for us. And also, obviously, the UL. And then we had a client who was going to be wanting to buy our fixtures and put them in European projects. So we then got CE certified. So it all snowballs, and you have to decide, like, where am I spending that money? Am I going to do that certification? Is it going to be worth it? Those kinds of things. But yeah, back to your question, we definitely think about, where could this go? Is it over a boardroom? Is it over an island? Is it in a cafeteria? Is it in someone's small apartment in Brooklyn? So we would like to think that we design for all of those different environments.
I think a shift happened recently where I feel like definitely 10 years ago, like the kind of, everybody wanted patina. Everyone wanted to show the aging of the materials. There was raw brass and there was natural leathers, and that was big even in like commercial, spaces like in lobbies, restaurants and stuff. I don't think we've kind of moved from that again. Like things are getting a little bit more sleek. But I noticed years ago when we were doing the woven leather chair, we did it in a raw, natural veg tan leather, which wears in beautifully over time. And if you own that chair in your home, you know who's wearing it in. But in a commercial space or like in a hotel lobby, if you see a woven leather chair that has like sweat stains and like it's really gross. And so we're, but I remember being specified by places like Rockwell Group. They're like, we just love that these are going to age in patina over time. I'm like, I get that, but as like a customer, so we're in the lobby of this hotel in New York, Time Hotel, and I've been back there, and I've been there like 3 or 4 years. I'm like, these chairs look so nasty. Like, why would you sit in that chair? And then I was just at Sister City Hotel, the new ACE project in New York, which is really beautiful, really well done, really considered. So many beautiful built-ins. Look it up. But they made a tray, just like a multi-use tray. I don't know. It's like a placemat, but it's natural veg tan leather. And I guess it's just supposed to be a multi-use, multi-purpose thing. We were talking about this in New York, but I was like, I go into the hotel, you expect to go into a fresh, clean space, and everything is fresh and clean and new linens and all that. And then there's this 18 by 36 inch piece of veg tan with like water stains on it and stains that you're not sure what they might be because it's a hotel. And it's just one of those things that so for us, because we use leather a lot, and especially in our chairs, now we're at that point with kind of our commercial clients and interior designers just saying like, hey, I know the natural veg tan leather looks really pretty like when it begins, but it's going to change a lot. And if it's in your client's home in a sitting room and they're never that's one thing, but if it's getting a lot of action in a high traffic commercial space, it's gonna look scuzzy. So we, there's been that back and forth. We have 2 chairs at Parachute Home, their retail space in Venice, and we did plated copper. When you plate copper, then you do a lacquer over it, but the oils in your skin break down that lacquer. So they have this beautiful showroom with these beautiful linen, all this, and then this decaying veg tan and bad copper plate, thing. And I'm just, it's like, kind of get that out of there. Like it's doing, it's not serving kind of the brand. So we've been really exploring, especially commercially, like how, if we're going to put a commercial stamp on this and say this thing's, built like a buffalo, like how do we, communicate that to them and say, yeah, this is going to look like this in a year, 2 years, 3 years. And, maybe we spec a different leather or, something like that. So we're always working that push and pull.
Design now plays an unprecedented role in our lives. Even our coffee drinks are designed and branded. How do you find clarity in this landscape, both in your design process and how you put things out there?
For me, I design for myself, or for me and my partner. We live with everything as does Grant. So it's kind of easy. It's sort of like, I know what my brand is, I know what my point of view is, because it's ultimately for me. It's sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm like, I want to live with everything I make. I think we get into trouble when we're not doing that, when we're trying to do something for a client that wants something very specific that we tried and then we're like, this isn't really what we do. Like, cool, but this is maybe not, we're not going to be the best ones to do this. Like maybe, find a fabricator, because we're not fabricators, we're designers. So I think when we figure out our point of view, as we have sort of organically over the years, it's pretty easy. It's like, do I want to live with this? Do I want to interact with this? Do I want, to show this to my friends? Would I give this to someone I love? It makes those cues sort of easier for us, I think.
For us, it's for me, it's somewhat similar in that, like, I try to have, like, just trying to find the truth in the material and the process, and so that ends up like guiding a lot of just like what is excess, what is what is ornamentation is a line I really try to toe carefully to, which is hard because ornamentation is awesome and it like really serves a purpose a lot of the times, but like I think I don't give myself always that freedom to use it because I'm trying to figure out what the purest idea is. And I think I spoke of this earlier, but I think the idea is whole like conversation and materiality and physics and craft. And if I don't have those as like my dialogue partners, I feel like I'm just a little bit lost. And I often say that like I think my process is very akin to like nonfiction rather than fiction, and I think that's like where I try to find it. And then a huge hero is actually John McPhee, who, if you don't know him, he's a brilliant nonfiction writer. But just like the way he approaches like a story and a narrative and deconstructs it in this way that like, keeps you along for the ride is like I think a lot of what drives like our articulation. And it's like when you're making those last decisions of even the smallest little details, can you find a logic somewhere that like tips your hand and pushes you in some place. And I think that's, I don't know how I stay to brand, I guess. But I oftentimes, like, I think one of my biggest compliments I ever get is when I launch a new product and everyone's like, doesn't look like your stuff. I'm like, good. Like, that's the whole point, is that it's not supposed to be the same thing every single time or the same thing. It's supposed to be, each one is a different conversation, and I don't want them to be interchangeable and blended. I want to create range in that stuff as much as possible, I guess. Probably to the detriment of my brand, but just from an intellectual pursuit.
I think there's a cohesion between all of your pieces because of the methodology behind it, right?
I think our big standout is color. I'm eternally a recovering painter, and if I had my way, I would have been a painter. But I mean, I do have my way. But it's really color, and the way that we produce, we're able to, because we're kind of like hybrid made to order, is that we can powder coat, I mean, it's mostly powder coating, any color for any customer anytime. So that's a real unique offering, because in the aesthetic that we're operating on, which is largely mass produced, and if you look at a lot of the Scandinavian brands, Menu, Muto, Hey, like we're in that range, but they'll offer 2 colors, 4 colors. Now, we mostly sell black and white, but for the customer who wants color, we're like, yeah, no problem. Pink, mauve, I mean, all of these, the cobalt blue, I don't know if you guys noticed, cobalt blue's everywhere right now. Like, it's having a little bit of a moment, but we've been doing that since the beginning. So right now, we have this backlog of all this cobalt, and I just like keep posting on Instagram, and people are like, oh, cobalt, yes! And I'm like, yeah, it's just a good color. We had a mint green that we did for years when mint was really hot, and we were in different trend magazines every 6 months because mint was the color of the moment, and it just happened to be the color of the moment for like 5 years, and now it's kind of waning. And this plant stand right here, this is like a sage or color, like that softer, I mean, sage and mauve, like all of those softer color, I mean, those are hitting, and we can deliver on those. And I think that's the one thing that we continue to be known for, is that we do color, and we do color well, and you expect that from us.
I think I just should ask probably what's next.
Well, we just launched this new product, and as is classic of our studio lease, we launched it without it being in production ready mode, and so it was that 11th hour thing where we got everything in crates and shipped it to New York, and we had the first article prototypes or third article prototypes. But we're actually going through production right now, which is its own kind of like process. Our scale, like where we're trying to hit our price points, involves like a small level of mass production. So we're talking about ramping up like the 25 quantities of each size, and then hopefully that sells, and that's not the worst investment I've ever made. But there's always that little leap of faith that you kind of show something before you write the big checks to make sure that you're not crazy, that there is a market for that stuff, because sometimes you don't know. I dream of having a showroom where you could get instant feedback. That sounds amazing, but our development process is rather expensive. There's a huge, at least for this fixture, it's like a pretty big investment cost. So we're going through that, and then trying to learn the lesson of like how it felt painful to do that at the 11th hour by starting the 2020 product launch like right now. So those are the two, kind of like putting one out the door and trying to learn the lesson of like starting the next one now.
I think for us, it's it's a new material for our hardware. In fact, we just had a conversation this week and also this morning with one of our collaborators about what that new material would look like. It will be interesting because even though we're very specific to Los Angeles, it might be made in the Midwest. So we're like exploring kind of, I mean, we'll never make in China, but we definitely are kind of going out of our comfort zone of not being able to just drive somewhere and see something in person. So that's part of what's, I think, coming probably this fall. And then the same thing I mentioned earlier with the globes. So having various sizes of acrylic globes that will sort of cover those light sources, and specifically making even smaller ones that look like a light bulb, right? Or a globe, so that way it appears as though it's an incandescent, but it's actually going to be obviously more environmentally friendly and more true to our brand. So those are kind of the things that are up and coming.
For us this year, it's some similar stuff as what Jolene said. We're knock on wood coming off the best quarter we've ever had. So our mom and pop manufacturers are feeling a little stressed and strained. So we're doing the same thing. We're kind of looking outside the box and not outside of, well, hopefully not outside of Los Angeles, but definitely not outside of the country, and looking at sort of a larger manufacturing options. And then also we've inadvertently really become a line to the trade, which has just happened sort of organically over the last 5 or 6 years. And as much as that's great, having the same repeated client and the client that kind of knows what to expect, and we do miss sometimes dealing with the public, even though we're set up to deal with the public and we have a retail store. So we're trying to sort of capture that client back a little bit, and we're thinking about sort of scary things like making things quick ship, small quick ship line, like looking at sort of what some of these young whippersnappers are doing and try to do something like that.
And we're looking at different categories, which is always fun. We've been playing around with ceramics for the last few years, which not personally, but working with some of the ceramic artists that we work with to make parts that then we kind of can collaborate on pieces. We've been doing a table collection with ceramicists, which has been really fun. And we've gotten in a little bit into textiles, doing some soft goods, doing some blankets and pillows, and it's been fun just to play with different materials and not be sort of in the same rut. And I think when we come back to the other things that we've been working on for a while, it makes it more fun because now we're thinking about a bigger palette. We're just kind of expanding the palette always, and it makes everything a little more interesting.
2018 was a big project year for us. We had a big lull on product. The stuff that we had already designed, the stuff that was already in production, and we just kind of kept getting these little projects. And we did so many last year, but based on the way we develop those items, so the stuff we did for the Saguaro and the stuff we did for our most localist Long Beach coffee shop, that we said, hey, can we do your full interior project for free, and just outfitted them, those kind of things. And also like Saguaro, that lobby project, that was almost back to like how it was in grad school. It was just like, just pay us materials and beer, because that whole entire lobby we did for like 18 grand. There was no money in it, but we knew that if we developed this stuff and they gave us tacos and beer, that it would turn into something down the line. So that afforded us to put those pieces into production. And so now we're taking all these pieces that we developed for projects last year and bringing them to the trade shows and putting them in front of interior designers and firms and agencies and posting on Instagram, which is still the number one way we generate business. Is just like, all we have to do is just share it on the free photo sharing app, regularly, and, with good, well-lit photos. And that's how that continues to be the main way we drive business. So even just saying, hey, the thing that you saw in the coffee shop we did last year, you can now buy that. So doing that, we pulled our website down 6 months ago. We don't have anything but a splash page that says email us, and that's working. So we're playing with all these different toggles. We don't have an online shop anymore. We're trying to invest in our specific retail partnerships and telling people when they email us in Cincinnati, hey, there's a retail shop right there. like just get your car and drive, and like you can see it in person, buy it in person, and rather than having us ship it across the country. So I am a big believer in brick and mortar. I think it's still such a delight to like walk into any store in any state and see new stuff. I am bummed at the kind of general store movement that carries the same brand in every single general store in every city. You know that, but it's also really, so seeing that kind of differentiation is really cool. I think in brick and mortar, and being able to have a local shop for home goods with local goods and international goods and all that, still like it's a really cool and big risk for people to still do. So we're excited to partner with those people who are still fighting that good fight.
I really appreciate your time and your guys' time. I know it's late, but I really don't want it to stop. So I have to say yes, thank you, and let's do it again sometime. Okay, great.
Thanks, Jenny.